Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of Overcoming Depression and Anxiety, brought to you by Healthy Me Summits. I'm Joanna Rushton, your host, and we're being joined today by Dr. Joe Dispenza. Dr. Dispenza first caught the public's eye as one of the scientists featured in the award-winning film What the Bleep Do You Know back in 2004. Since then, his work has expanded, deepened, and spiraled into several key directions, all of which reflect his passion for exploring how people can use the latest findings from the fields of neuroscience and quantum physics to not only heal illness, but also to enjoy a more fulfilled and happy life. Dr. Joe is driven by the conviction that each one of us has the potential for greatness and unlimited abilities. Dr. Joe, first of all, thank you so much for making the time to be with us here today. It's an absolute amazing pleasure. I'm beaming out of my own being to be here talking to you. It's a dream come true, so I must be doing something right in the work that you're putting out there, because I'm experiencing it right now.
I'm happy to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. So look, we're going to get straight into it because I know that 45 minutes to an hour flies by. And the very first thing that I'd love to connect our audience with is your personal experience where you have used what you've learned of neuroscience and working in the quantum field to heal yourself from a miraculous state of an accident that left you paralyzed to now being fully functional and walking again against all the odds of what doctors and surgeons told you was possible. So I just would love you to connect with our audience, and you know, that's the first real evidence of what you teach is possible.
Sure. I think for some of us to wake up, we need a wake-up call. And in 1986, I got the call. I was in a triathlon in Palm Springs, California, and I was on the biking portion of the race, and I was passing two cyclists on a corner, and there was a police officer waving me on to make the turn. And as he was waving me on to make the turn, he had his back to the oncoming traffic. So as I turned and passed these two bikers, a four-wheel drive SUV going about 55 miles per hour basically catapulted me out of my bike, and I wound up breaking 6 vertebrae in my spine. And when you land and compress your vertebrae like that, the volume of the vertebrae as they compress begin to pancake, and the blocks of those vertebrae cause the volume to go back towards the spinal cord. So I had multiple compression fractures of my spine. I had bone fragments on my spinal cord, and the arch where the spinal cord passed through at the very top segment, the 8th thoracic vertebrae, had broken like a pretzel, so I had cord compression as well. So I had 4 opinions from 4 of the leading surgeons in Southern California, and all of them said I would need a radical surgery called the Harrington rod surgery. Now, Harrington rod surgery, by the way, if I had seen a patient in my clinic with this type of injuries, I probably would have referred them for the surgery, but this was me, and I wasn't so quick to make that decision. And they told me that if I didn't have the surgery, I probably would never walk again, and I would be facing some serious neurological conditions. So they cut off the back parts of the vertebrae, and in my case, it would be from the base of my neck to the base of my spine. And then they take the stainless steel rods and they place them along the contour of the spine, and they drill with screws into the vertebral segments. And when they drill the screws in, it cantilevers the spinal column off the spinal cord and hopefully gives it some relief from the pressure. And then they take bone fragments from your hip and they paste it over the top and pretty much hope for the best. And I remember after the 4th opinion from the 4th leading surgeon there that I started thinking about spending the rest of my life living on addictive medications or living in a wheelchair or being handicapped in some way. And I started thinking about all the philosophy and all the science and all the theory that I had studied previous to this moment. And I think when you take philosophy and you apply it or you personalize it, if you're going to demonstrate it in some way and initiate that philosophy, if you get your behaviors to match your intentions, you should have some new experience. The new experience should then transform you in some way, both neurologically and biologically in your body and genetically. And then as we begin to experience the emotion of that new experience, I think we chemically teach our body what our mind has intellectually understood. So knowledge is for the mind and experience is for the body, and we have to embody the truth of this philosophy. So the key then is to be able to replicate the experience over and over again, so you condition the body to begin to innately become the mind. And when the body and mind are working together, you move into a state of being, or you begin to master that philosophy. So going from philosopher to initiate to master, from knowledge to experience to wisdom, from mind to body to soul, from thinking to doing to being, became my passion. So I started to think about this intelligence that gives us life, that keeps our heart beating and digesting our food and organizing these trillions of functions in every single cell of our body. And I thought, well, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not doing anything. I'm basically laying face down, and I'm not moving very well. Well, I'm going to do two things. First thing is I'm going to make contact with this intelligence. This intelligence has a consciousness. Consciousness is awareness. Awareness is paying attention. So it's got to be paying attention to me. And I'm going to take all of my attention off my outer world on people and things and objects and places and business and training, and I'm going to go inward with the same kind of conviction and passion. And because consciousness is awareness and awareness is paying attention, I got to be as present with it as it is with me. So I'm going to give it a very specific plan, a design, a template. I'm going to reconstruct my vertebrae, and when I'm happy with the design, I'm going to surrender to this intelligence, because it knows how to heal way better than I do. To me, to keep my body alive for 10 seconds, I wouldn't make it. So I thought, well, if my will matches its will, if my mind matches its mind, and if my love for life matches its love for life, it should begin to answer the call. The second thing I said was, I'm not going to let any thought slip by my awareness that I don't want to experience. Well, it sounds really easy, but when you're in crisis or trauma, I realized that we focus on what we don't want to have happen instead of what we do want to have happen. And so I would start reconstructing my vertebrae, and then the next thing you know, I'd start thinking about living in a wheelchair, whether I should sell my practice or sell my home. And I realized that I lost my attention, and I was focusing what I didn't want to have happen. I'd have to start all over again. So I was so frustrated because I couldn't get my mind to do what I wanted it to do. And this became my passion. And I think for 6 weeks I went through the biggest dark night of the soul of my life, because I was working so hard to get my mind aligned with these principles. At the end of 6 weeks, I kind of hit the sweet spot, and all of a sudden everything got easier. And the moment I was able to do it, instead of in 3 hours or 3.5 hours, in 45 minutes, I knew that I was firing and wiring new circuits in my brain, increasing my level of attention, reproducing the same level of mind, and it began to become easier. So that's when I started noticing physiological changes in my body. And the moment I started to notice the changes that were happening outside of me with what I was doing inside of me, I started paying attention to what I did, and I did it with more passion and conviction. And from that point forward, for the next 3 or 4 weeks, my body just healed dramatically and quickly, and I was back on my feet in 10.5 weeks, and then back living my life at 12 weeks, and I just made a deal with myself that if I was ever able to walk again, I'd spend the rest of my life studying the mind-body connection, and for the most part, mind over matter, and that's what I've been doing since 1986.
It's a miraculous story, and I just feel that it's one that gives so much hope and inspiration to people, no matter what it is that they're suffering in their life, whether it's something physical, whether it's something mental or emotional. And I guess this is where I'd like to just take the next step into exploring, because what you do now, as you say, is you travel the world and you teach people how to embrace, embody, and live almost in this quantum field of creation, and doing it in a very, very different way to what we traditionally know ourselves to be able to create. And so one of the things I've heard you say is that it's not about positive thinking, and that it's beyond that, it's more than that. This new paradigm is more than that. And yet when we're working with people with depression or anxiety, in the more traditional therapies, we come back to things like positive psychology and using positive thinking within those therapies. So, could you explain a little bit to us about how it is that we need to go one step beyond those paradigms, those traditional therapies, to really start to change our life, to change our outward experience that we do from the inside? How would you take that for those that, and correlating that to those that are in a place of depression and anxiety?
Sure. Well, let's start with some very simple basic principles. I believe that your personality creates your personal reality. And your personality is made up of how you think, how you act, and how you feel. So the present personality who's listening to this show and viewing it has created their present personal reality called their life. Which means if you wanted to create a new personal reality, you would have to change your personality on some level. And you would have to start thinking about what you've been thinking about and change it. Become aware of your automatic habits and behaviors and modify them. And primarily look at the emotions that you've memorized that are connected to past experiences and decide if those emotions belong in your future. And I think that most people try to create a new personal reality as the same personality, and it doesn't work. We literally have to become someone else. So you and I think about 60 to 70,000 thoughts in one day. Out of those 60 to 70,000 thoughts that we think in one day, 90% of those thoughts are the same thoughts as the day before. So reason this with me. The same thoughts will always lead to the same choices. The same choices will lead to the same behaviors. The same behaviors will create the same experiences, and the same experiences will produce the same emotions. Those same emotions start to drive our very same thoughts, and we get caught in this loop. And our biology, our neurocircuitry, our neurochemistry, our neurohormones, and even our genetic expression is equal to how we think, how we act, and how we feel. So if you keep thinking the same way, choosing the same way, behaving the same way, experiencing the same events that stamp the same networks of neurons into the same patterns, all for the familiar feeling or emotion that you've defined as yourself, you do a few things. You begin to hardwire your brain into a very finite circuitry because you're thinking the same way. And you keep signaling the same genes emotionally, and now your biology is a reflection of who you are. So the redundancy of that cycle begins to condition the body to know how to live subconsciously as the mind. Now, once the body becomes the mind, that's called a habit. And 95% of who we are by the time we're 35 years old, now this is science, is a set of memorized behaviors, emotional reactions, beliefs, perceptions, attitudes that function like a subconscious computer program. In other words, you've done it so many times that you don't have to consciously think about it. Your body's on autopilot. So now, a person decides to change, and they're going to use 5% of their conscious mind to work against 95% of what they've memorized subconsciously. So they can think positively all they want, but if they're feeling negativity because they've been programmed that way, that's mind and body in opposition. Why? Because thoughts are the language of the brain and feelings are the language of the body. And how you think and how you feel creates your state of being. You could create a dream board with all your wonderful visions of all the things you want in your life, but if you feel unworthy and you're programmed to that, and you're not even aware that you feel that way, then you have opposition between the mind and the body. Turns out, when the mind and body are working together as one, that is a state of being, and that state of being defines your personality. So the person waits for a crisis or trauma or disease or diagnosis or loss to finally make up their mind to change. And the reason is because the moment you reach that lowest denominator and you don't feel like you normally feel, you could actually look at yourself for the first time through the eyes of someone else because you're no longer being the same person. Now, this is elemental. That concept in neuroscience is called metacognition. And because of the size of the frontal lobe, we can begin to think about what we're thinking and decide to change it, to modify our behaviors, to do a better job in life, to look at the emotions that we live by every single day and become conscious that we're living in guilt or unworthiness or shame or fear or depression and decide if those emotions belong into our future. So the fact that you can observe those states of mind and body means you're no longer the program. Now you're consciousness observing the program. and you begin to objectify your subjective self. This is the first step in change, is lighting the match in the dark place. Now, what does this have to do with anxiety and depression? Well, on a functional brain scan, anxiety and depression look very similar. Think about this. Anxiety is thinking about the worst case scenario in your life based on some past experience, and focusing on that worst case scenario to the exclusion of everything else, worried that it's going to happen again because it happened in the past, and emotionally embracing yourself for that event. Well, when you're combining that intention, that thought, with the emotion of fear, and you keep doing that over and over again, you'll condition your body to become the mind of fear. And all of a sudden, in times, for certain people, they have panic attacks and they can't control it with their conscious mind because it's been programmed subconsciously. Now, the brain is literally an anticipation machine. So as you begin to select the worst case scenario, you're living in survival, because in survival, you have better chances of surviving if you select the worst case scenario, that anything less happens, you can survive. So people constantly unconsciously choose the worst thing that could happen in their life, and they're ready for it, and they're protecting themselves for it. And when they get it right, they say, look at me, see how smart I am? You need to hang out with me. But what happens when they get it wrong? That's called anxiety, that's called depression, that's called insomnia, it's called OCD, it's called neuroses. Because the redundancy and the repetition of that cycle over time then causes a habituation. And so the body is beginning to live in that future reality in the present moment, and the body begins to embrace emotionally the state of fear or vigilance. Look at depression, unfolding a past bitter memory that's embossed in the recesses of your gray matter, and over again bringing it to life. And as you bring it to life, your body produces the same chemistry as if it's in that past experience. And over again, you condition your body to become hopeless and powerless because you are literally conditioning it to live in the past. So now, if anxiety is looking into the future and focusing on the worst thing that could happen, and depression is reviewing the worst thing that happened in your past, then whatever happened to the present moment? And so teaching people how to really work on finding the present moment is the beginning stages of healing actually anxiety and depression. And we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, professionals too, that have healed themselves from anxiety and depression just by becoming conscious of continuously thinking the same way, either in the past and the future, and working on being present. And we do meditations that actually show people how to find that sweet spot of the generous present moment. Now, it's going to require some awareness, because in the beginning, you become conscious of how unconscious you really are. But the practice of it over time literally begins the body to liberate energy. And we have so many brain scans to show pre and post studies of people, in 4 or 5 days that have healed themselves of anxiety and depression.
Wow. So, there's a few things that I'm hearing there, and one of them is almost, and you said it right at the beginning, we almost have to get to the very bottom, have an illness or scrape the bottom of the barrel to finally get to that point where something has to be done differently. And I guess this is one of the things that I'd love to ask, because I've studied your work and I apply it, and I'm somebody, who I consider that, most of the time I wake up and, I'm positive and I'm happy and I embrace the state of being that I want to experience. And even then I think to myself, wow, this takes a lot of energy and effort. And I'm somebody who's uplifted, I'm upbeat, I love life. Yet to be conscious and to be applying these teachings that you teach still takes me, who loves life, a lot of energy, effort, and focus. So I kind of go to myself, wow, imagine what it's going to be like for these people who are tired, fatigued, living in a state of desperation, on the emotional roller coaster of either anxiety or depression. And I'm thinking to myself, how can they, where's their starting point? How can they begin? If I'm finding it really challenging and I'm, not depressed, not tired, not anxious, where do these people start, Dr. Joe?
Well, the biggest problem with anxiety and depression is actually being able to think greater than how you feel. And when feelings become the means of thinking, or you can't think greater than how you feel, for the most part, people are thinking in the past. And so it is a difficult journey because it requires a true neurological, biological, chemical, hormonal, genetic death of the old self. Now, the simple way to deal with this, and we've done this so many times, is that cognitive process of writing down the thoughts that are slipping by your awareness every single day that you accept, believe, and surrender without any analysis. And whatever you accept, believe, and surrender to without any analysis actually slips past the analytical mind and begins to program the autonomic nervous system to make the exact pharmacy of chemicals equal to the thought that you're thinking. So if you're thinking a desperate thought or a self-depreciating thought or a futile thought, your brain is going to turn on a set of circuits that are going to begin to signal your body to feel exactly the way you were just thinking. By the same means, the body, when it's feeling that way, is causing you to think more corresponding thoughts equal to how you feel. So this loop of thinking and feeling then keeps the person really trapped in a specific state of being. So if the person just took a moment and wrote down 2 or 3 thoughts that they have been thinking, that they've been believing to be the truth, 2 behaviors: if they complain, if they blame, if they make excuses, they feel sorry for themselves, if they lay around, whatever it is, and 2 emotions that they live by, or 3 emotions that they live by every single day, and they just named them. And they became conscious of what the thoughts were, became aware of what their behaviors were, and looked at those emotions every time. The more conscious they became of those states of mind and body, the less unconscious they would go. In other words, the thought or the behavior, the emotion wouldn't go by unchecked. They would begin to become aware of them. Now that begins to no longer fire and no longer wire the same circuits in the brain, no longer producing the same chemicals and the neuropeptides in the limbic brain that signal hormonal centers. Then you're no longer signaling the same genes epigenetically. The body will go into stasis for a period of time. Now, it's going to feel uncomfortable. It's going to feel unfamiliar. There's going to be a certain amount of unpredictability and uncertainty because you're stepping into the unknown. And most people would rather hold on to their depression or their guilt or their sadness because at least it's predictable and familiar. Jumping into that river and making the effort to be a little bit uncomfortable then causes you then to be thinking, well, with attention and intention, what thoughts do I want to fire and wire in my brain? What behaviors do I want to demonstrate today? How would a healthy, happy person live? What could I do today? And just begin to make small, measurable changes. And as you begin to rehearse and think about and plan your actions, there'll come a moment that the brain won't know the difference between the two, and you'll begin to install the circuitry in your brain and prime it to begin to demonstrate those behaviors. Now, here's the key. If you can say to your body, I'm going to teach my body emotionally what that future could feel like ahead of the actual experience, then you would have to cultivate a certain amount of gratitude, a certain amount of joy, a certain amount of freedom, a certain amount of courage or fearlessness or strength or invincibility. I know this from seeing it hundreds and hundreds of times. Even if the person makes the smallest measure, the smallest effort in cultivating that emotion, and they combine it with a clear intention, their body, as the unconscious mind, begins to believe it's living in that future reality in the present moment, and they're literally reconditioning their body to a new mind and signaling new genes in new ways. And now the body is beginning to biologically change. So the person's able to do that. Instead of saying, I don't feel like doing it today, they made a deal that they're going to do this every single day. We have seen professionals that are doctors and attorneys and dentists and salesmen for companies that had serious anxiety and depression, who wouldn't even leave the house, some of them, living a normal life again because they're no longer focusing on the worst case scenario. They're no longer revisiting the past. They're more in the present moment. And so when the body can finally surrender into the present moment, wherever you place your attention is where you place your energy. You got a lot of energy in the present moment, and you're no longer siphoning energy into the predictable future or the familiar past. So it's difficult in the beginning because it requires a tremendous amount of awareness. But we don't ask people to do it with their eyes open. We ask people to do it with their eyes closed. We want them to eliminate all the stimulation from their external environment. We want them to sit their body down for a moment and not get it up and do anything. And we want them to get beyond time. And we want them to begin to manage and check in with their inner world of thoughts and feelings, and repeatedly then be able to master those thoughts. And as they begin to do that, the body literally starts to surrender. And when that occurs, the side effect of that is true joy and true transformation.
And I think that one of the greatest learnings that I've taken and embraced and practiced is the understanding that when you match the thought with a feeling, with the emotion that would represent or express that thought, and you put those two together and you continue to repeat, like just keep pressing repeat, 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 that's where the magic happens. And I remember, you know, when I always kind of describe it, when the light first went on for me and I realized there was just, you know, so much more than just what I'm thinking, and that I have this power to create. What I started to do, however, in the very early stages was just try to work it all from my thought and just try to think about what I wanted. And I wasn't actually practicing what did that feel like? What would that feel like in my body? Where would I feel that thought if I became conscious to connecting the thought with my body? And when I started to do that, I began to have a whole new experience. I could actually feel energy in certain areas of my body, and now I'm no longer just focusing on the thought, I'm focusing on the feeling that represents that thought, and then matching them both together. That for me was my turning point in when I spend an hour and 15 minutes and do your water rising meditation, and things change in that day, within that 24-hour period. I'm like, oh my God, you know?
This is a great conversation, because a lot of people will say, oh yeah, your thoughts are things and your thoughts create your reality. And yeah, I want to design a new destiny and I have a vision of my future. But, you know, that thought is consciousness. That feeling is energy. That thought is intention. That feeling has a frequency. That thought is information. And that feeling generates light and information, frequency. So you can't have one without the other. As a matter of fact, they're pretty much bedfellows. They're inextricably combined. The problem with most people is that their body and brain are in the past. Your brain is organized to reflect everything you know in your life. Your brain is a record of the past. It's an artifact of everything to date. And if feelings and emotions are the end product of past experiences, and you're feeling the same way every single day, it means nothing new is happening in your life. And if those feelings, familiar feelings, are driving your thoughts and you can't think greater than how you feel, then you're in the past. And your thoughts are equal to your past. And so you can't create a new future living in the past like that. So then getting people over that hump, getting them past that point where they tell a story about why they are the way they are, because everybody's got a story. And that story, by the way, according to Scientific American, 50% of it isn't even true. You know, you embellish it to reaffirm those emotions. You get a person past that narrative, and you get them clear on what they want. That's called intention. Now, it's not enough to just have that intention. You got to become passionate about that intention. And we say that you have to teach your body emotionally what that future is going to feel like ahead of the actual experience. Now, to the materialist, to the person who defines reality with their senses, they're going to say, well, I'm going to feel empowered when my new job comes, and I'm going to feel in love when my new relationship happens, and I'm going to be in awe when the mystical moment occurs, and I'll feel wholeness when my healing takes place, and I'll give thanks when my abundance comes. Well, that's the old model of reality, of Newtonian physics, of cause and effect, you know, waiting for something outside of us to change how we feel inside of us. And the moment we feel differently inside of us, we pay attention to whoever or whatever caused that. That's cause and effect. That event creates a memory. And for the most part, then we're victims because we'll have to wait for something to change out there in order for us to feel better. But in this quantum model of reality where subjective mind produces objective changes in your life, you have to feel wholeness for the healing to occur. You have to feel empowered for your success to show up. You have to be in awe for the mystical moment to occur. You have to be in love with life and yourself for your new relationship to happen. And you got to be in absolute gratitude and freedom for your abundance to find you. And so there's a little bit of a turning around that has to take place because we're not conditioned to be this way. But the moment you do this and you begin to understand the science behind it, and science is the contemporary language of mysticism, science we use to demystify the mystical so that nothing is left to conjecture or dogma or superstition. Our students know exactly what they're doing and why, and they understand it. And if you understand the how, the why and the what, the how gets easier. So we want people then to literally create that state of being ahead of the actual event so that when the event finally starts to occur, or they start noticing changes in their external world or in their body, they're going to pay attention to what they did and they're going to do it again. So the side effect of this, and this is what we've been measuring over the last 3 years, is not only people healing themselves from anxiety and depression, but from cancer, from diabetes, from MS, from lupus, from rheumatoid arthritis, from rare genetic disorders that medical science had no solution for endocrine conditions, for chronic pain. I mean, the brain and body finally are reprogrammed into a new state of being, and the disease or the condition existed in the old personality. This person is literally someone else, and they kind of wake up and they say, God, it's been 2 weeks and I haven't any pain, or it's been 2 weeks and I haven't any symptoms, or God, I wonder what happened, because they're so busy being someone else that their biology literally reorganizes itself to a new mind. And so the reason that anxiety and depression is so prevalent in this world is because most people live in survival. And living in survival is living in stress. And stress is when your brain and body are knocked out of homeostasis. The stress response is what your body innately does to return itself back to order. So then, all organisms can tolerate short-term stress. The zebra gets chased by the lion, the zebra outruns the lion, 15 minutes later it goes back to grazing and the event is over and the body moves back to balance. Human beings, though, we can turn on the stress response just by thought alone. We can begin to think about things that are going to happen, or our problems, or what we should have said at the staff meeting, or that traumatic event that happened 6 years ago. And we can literally produce the same chemicals in our brain and body as if that event is occurring. Now, if you turn on the stress response and you can't turn it off, now you're headed for some disease or breakdown, because no organism can live in emergency mode for an extended period of time. Now, here's the key. Most people who have anxiety and depression usually had some type of traumatic event that's happened in their past, and they're getting ready for it to happen again, or anticipating it happening again. Or they keep revisiting it in the past and they keep worrying about it in the future. And most people who have anxiety have depression. Most people who have depression have anxiety. It's kind of they work together. So then the chemicals of stress give the brain and body a rush of adrenaline. They give it a rush of energy.
Give me 1 second, Dr. Joe. I'm just going to put in, I can hear a lot of background noise for myself. Shut that off. Okay.
So the hormones of stress actually release certain chemicals that give the brain and body a rush of energy. And now here's the problem, because the rush of energy, the rush of those chemistry becomes a little bit addictive. It becomes like a drug. And then we have to then, use the problems and conditions in our life to reproduce the fear, reproduce the depression, reproduce the anger, reproduce the guilt, because it makes us feel something. So then, if you can turn on the stress response just by thought alone, and these chemicals are like a narcotic that give us a rush of energy, then we can become addicted to our own thoughts. And this is why change is so hard, because we have to overcome the addiction of those chemicals. And so just like any addiction, when you decide to break an addiction, you can say with your conscious mind, oh, I'm going to stop eating chocolate, I'm going to stop eating sugar, I'm going to stop smoking, I'm going to stop complaining, whatever it is. And it goes really well for the first 2 hours. But remember, just like a craving with any addiction, it's the body that wants the chemistry. So if the body's not getting the chemistry, it starts sending signals back to the brain and saying, come on, generate those thoughts that are going to make those chemicals. So then we start to hear these voices in our head, and we start to get these images, and we start to believe in those thoughts as if they're true. And those thoughts start making the chemicals that cause us to return back to the old self. And so when people understand that they're going through withdrawals from those chemicals, that there is something on the other side, and if they're given the technology and the techniques to do it, they will free themselves from the chains of those addictions. And the body will literally begin to acquiesce to a new mind. And we'll see it on brain scan after brain scan, where the person in 4 days or 3 days that were high-functioning CEOs that were medicated because that's the only way they could make decisions the way they did, all of a sudden they just have a different brain, and we can say to them, the change just isn't in your mind. It's actually in your brain. And so doing the work then requires a little bit of attention in the beginning, but you gain on it pretty easily, and we have a community of people that are doing it pretty well.
Mm. And what I love about what you've shared there is this journey from literally being the victim to the victorious, and taking back what you feel you don't have control of. And as you commit to the small little steps that you've just described for us, we are able to step from that place of feeling like things are being done to us, and we're back in that old paradigm of cause and effect, to now being in a place where, hold on a second, I have the power, I have the ability to change my outside experience rather than think the outside experience is happening to me.
Exactly. And there's another level to this too, because let's just say that somebody betrayed you, or somebody injured you, or someone did something to you, and yeah, the experience branded you neurologically, and the experience produced a real strong emotion of shock, pain, or fear, or whatever. Mm. All right, we take that person, we put him in a straitjacket, and we shoot him to the moon. Well, okay, now what? You still have to change the circuitry in your brain, and you still have to literally change the emotion that's stored in your body. So sooner or later, you're going to realize that the pharmaceuticals and all the things you're doing may just be covering the symptom, that you have the ability then, literally, when you combine a little quantum physics and neuroplasticity and neuroscience and neuroendocrinology and psychoneuroimmunology and epigenetics, you give people a lot of hope around possibility. Mm. And so our students, this is a time in history where it's not enough to know. This is a time in history to know how. And when a student gets on the stage and talks about their journey in overcoming their condition, I love the stories because they didn't overcome their condition in 2 weeks, although we've had that. But if it took them 2 years to develop their anxiety, it may take them a year to reverse it. Mm-hmm. But when they finally overcome their anxiety and they're born again in the same life, they're working from a new brain. Mm-hmm. They're working from a new gene pool. They're a different individual. And they'll look back at that event that traumatized them. And I've heard this so many times. I'll say to the person, well, now when you look back at that event, how do you feel about it? And they say, you know what? It was my greatest teacher. And I always say to them, the memory without the emotional charge is called wisdom. And that's the name of the game here. Now you're ready to create a new experience. How could you create a new experience if you're still living by the emotions of the past? You're anchored to the past. Mm-hmm. And if those emotions are driving the thoughts, and the thoughts are creating the emotions, and the repetition of that cycle conditions the body to be the mind, and the body literally is in the past. So we got to pull the body out of the past, and it requires just constant effort. But just like riding a bicycle, if you keep doing it over and over again, it's going to get easier.
Mm-hmm. And that's, that's certainly been my personal experience, is, with that commitment, and it's subtle. The subtleties are incredible. I remember waking up one morning and being put into an old situation, but in that moment, I was conscious of, oh wow, I'm not thinking the old thoughts that I would normally think. I became conscious that they were kind of there to take if I wanted to, but I was conscious for that first time of realizing I'm not reacting like I would have reacted in the past to this kind of situation. And that to me was just like, it was subtle, but it was profound. I was just like, oh wow, when did that happen? When did I actually stop thinking the old way?
I'll tell you exactly when it happened. When you were sitting in your meditation and your body was telling you that you couldn't and it was too hard and you were too tired and get up and have a cup of coffee and start tomorrow, and your body was trying to hijack your brain so you could return back to the same familiar self, and you sat there and didn't get up, you were saying to your body, you're no longer the mind. I'm the mind. And you're going to sit here, and you're going to sit here until I'm done, and then I'm going to recondition you to a new mind, and you're going to get up being happy in a different state of being. And so you lower the volume to your emotional body, you lower the volume to your emotional reactions, you're taming and you're training the body, you're tempering that animal aspect of yourself, which means you're diminishing your survival chemicals, and you're starting to open your heart, and the energy starts to move into this center, and you're less reactive, and you're more loving, you're more selfless, you're more caring, you're more compassionate, you're more giving, because that's the consciousness of this center. And so when people start to build this model and they start to understand it, that nobody is worth it. Nobody is worth mismanaging your energy and falling back into that familiar state. But as people start to climb out of the emotions of their past, they're less reactionary because they're less addicted to those emotions, because in their meditation every day they were overcoming some aspect of themselves. And the side effect of this is you become more conscious, like, wow, I didn't react. As a matter of fact, I handled that really well. And you know what? I love myself a little bit more today because I did. And by you doing that, you give people permission to do the same in your life. And all of a sudden, it becomes like this incredible level of change that begins to catapult and progress in many different areas of your world.
And that is the other thing that I have really noticed as well, is when I'm consciously choosing to be the experience that I want to have, it is amazing how my energy starts to affect the energy of the person that I'm with, who perhaps when they first are in my company are like this and quite closed down, to then simply me holding my space for myself to have the experience I want to have, which is to be open and to be receptive. And then all of a sudden I start to see, and I haven't been, I'm not doing or saying anything different to this person, but all of a sudden their arms start to unfold, and it's like they don't even really understand what's gone on either, but they've started to feel more comfortable. And it's this energy exchange. It's awesome.
Well, it is energy. As a matter of fact, it's all energy. And Einstein even said everything is energy. And that when you change your energy, you change your life. So we've done an experiment where we took 550 people in a room, and we had 40 people wearing heart rate monitors in the front of the room. And those 500 people in the rest of the room were sending the thought of loving kindness and care and compassion and gratitude to the people, and having the intention for the greatest good of everybody in the room. Now, when you wear an HRV monitor, a heart rate monitor, when you feel anxiety or when you feel frustration, when you feel impatience, your heart beats out of order. It beats incoherently. And when you feel those emotions, you're taxing the body of energy and you're turning it into chemistry. The field around your body actually shrinks. We've measured this. When you start getting heart-centered and you start relaxing and you're poised and you're spontaneous and you're breathing and you're feeling present and in love with life, you open this center right here. And when you feel those emotions, even gratitude, the heart gets very coherent. Gets very organized, and it's like dropping a pebble in the water. It produces a ripple. If you keep that emotion going, you keep dropping the pebble. If you can feel that emotion profoundly and deeply and richly, you're dropping a stone in, a bigger stone, that's creating a bigger wave. Now, this is science. The field around your body can be up to 9 meters wide. Now you've just gone from more matter to more energy, from more particle to wave. So when you're living by survival chemicals, you're more matter and less energy. So you're trying to control and predict everything in your life because you're matter trying to change matter. Limited way to do things. And so then the effect of that is that we're always trying to manipulate our life because we're vibrating at the same speed of everything in our life. So then when you start opening the heart, it produces a magnetic field, and all frequency or energy carries information. Your intention is your thought. Carried on that magnetic field, and now you're broadcasting a signature into the field. So here we go. We got 500 people in the room, and all of a sudden everybody's sending the thought for the greatest good for the people wearing the heart rate monitors in the front of the room. I get the call from the senior analyst, the senior researcher at the Heart Math Institute who's partnering with us and measuring these changes, and he's blown away. because 80% of the people that are wearing the heart rate monitors at the exact same time, the exact same meditation, the exact same day, all go into heart coherence at the exact same time, which means they're being influenced by an invisible field beyond space and time. Now, here's the cool part. If their heart is going into coherence, then every person that they're bonded to in their life, that they're related to in a relationship, should produce a measurable effect in their heart in creating coherence, to be more at peace, to be more present, to be more open, to feel safe, that they don't have to protect themselves. And all of a sudden, you got a community of people now that are bound by this invisible energy, where they're all of a sudden moving out of survival, and they're starting to be their authentic self, feel more wholeness, more free, which is what I call the natural state of being. So we know that a clear intention and an elevated emotion not only changes your biology, but it has an effect on your life as well.
Mm, mm. I love it. I love it. I could just immerse myself in these teachings, and they just put a smile on my face, because my soul, my being, at an innate level, just feels its truth. And even though sometimes the intellectual side of me doesn't understand it, the greater part of me gets it, and that's what I love, because that's when I can just let go of the need to kind of know all the time, and just sit and be with it and go, okay, I don't have to know this for this to work, or I don't have to have proof and understand it to every detail. I can just work with my thoughts and my feelings, play with it, become a child with it, get curious about it, and even have results just playing that way.
Of course. I mean, look, we're human beings, and we're divine creators. That's who we are. So you're either living in a state of survival, which is the stress hormones of fear and anxiety and worry and depression and hopelessness and powerlessness and guilt and shame and violence and hostility. And those are all created by the hormones of stress. And psychology calls those normal human states of consciousness. Those are altered states of consciousness. Or we could live in a state of creation and begin to become scientists in our own life. And the smallest measures sometimes produce the biggest changes, because in our innocence, where we're not expecting anything to happen, is the moment we're no longer anticipating the worst case scenario, and all of a sudden reality starts to reorganize itself. And I've seen it too many times now, and I have a pretty intellectual, analytical mind, and I question all of this, but I'm at the point now where I've seen so many brain scans and epigenetic changes and heart rate monitors and energy changes in the room and energy changes around people's bodies, that common people around the world are doing the uncommon, and they're not waiting for crisis or disease or trauma or diagnosis to make the change. I always say you can learn and change in a state of pain and suffering, or you can learn and change in a state of joy and inspiration. Which would you choose? Because when you're in that elevated state and you're feeling empowered because you are a creator, you can look at the old self from an elevated state of mind and body instead of at a diminished level of mind and body. It's the same thing.
Mm, mm. And I know that in your workshops, as you have mentioned, you measure all of these changes. You're measuring them at a neurological level, you're measuring them at a heart coherence level. And you mentioned just before that you're even measuring the energy in the room. How do you do that?
We have this sophisticated instrument from Russia that measures fluctuations in the emission of gases that are correlated with energy. And it's a sophisticated instrument, and as the energy begins to rise in the room, we can begin to measure the elevation in the frequency. And in every single advanced workshop that we've done in Australia, in Europe, in Mexico, in the United States, we've done, I think, 8 or 9 now. The energy has always continuously gotten higher in the room. Well, love is a faster frequency than shame or guilt or unworthiness. And when you have waves of energy that start to line up, they create what's called a synergy or constructive interference, bigger amplitudes. And those bigger amplitudes are measurable. So now everybody dropping stones in the water at the same time, and you start getting these big waves. Those big waves then you can measure. And the last event we did in Cabo San Lucas in Mexico in September and October of this year, we doubled the energy in the room higher than any event we've ever done, and we were blown away. It was just incredible. So now for me, it's just making the time to actually interpret all of the science we have. We were looking at brain scans yesterday. Our neuroscientist, his team and I were looking, and we had one brain scan. We stared at each other, no kidding, for 20 minutes and never said a word, because it was so outside of convention and it was so incredibly profound that it took us 15 minutes to formulate a question to each other, like, what do you think this could be? It was so coherent and so beautiful and so profound. We're making scientific history, and I love the fact that you don't have to be a Buddhist monk or a nun with 40 years of devotion or a Kabbalistic rabbi or a minister or an academic or a scholar. You can be a common person, and I'm thrilled about that.
We are so thrilled to have had you on this summit and to share your wisdom and your life experience with us. I truly, truly believe that everything that you have shared is offering hope, inspiration, and more importantly, a place for somebody to start. If they have tuned in and it resonates to their being, even if it doesn't, they don't understand it in their mind, but it resonates to their being, and that's what I encourage people to tune into, then I just, thank you so much for just, being here and sharing with us. I have just one last question before we go. We're asking this of all of our speakers. We're putting together a Healthy Me Summit positive or a Healthy Me Summit affirmation book of I Am for our listeners to be able to download and inspire them and help them to start creating their I Ams for themselves every day by being inspired by reading others. So if we were to ask you to contribute an I Am, what might that be for us today?
Always, I am unlimited.
Unlimited. I love it. I love it.
Now, there's a condition to that, because affirmations are designed to affirm your state of being. You can't say I am unlimited and not feel it. You have to feel unlimited first. In other words, if you are going to do something unlimited, you have to become unlimited. You have to feel unlimited. Once you're feeling unlimited, now it's time to affirm, of course I'm unlimited because I feel that way. You can't say I'm unlimited and feel guilty or worthy or depressed, because for the most part now, that thought is not slipping by your awareness. So move into that state of being first and work yourself up into that state of being. And when you command I am, you're saying my mind and body are aligned to this reality. Practice that a few times and see what type of changes happen in your life.
I think you've just given, for all of those that are cynics out there as to why affirmations don't work, I think you've just been given the reason and the answer. So if you listen to what Joe Dispenza has just said there for us right there, you have to embody the feeling within that I am. Otherwise, they're just words.
Exactly.
So thank you so very much. You've just been an absolute pleasure. We cannot wait for you to come back down under and do another one of your workshops and also your advanced workshops, because I want to meet you in person. Skype is great, but now it's time for in person.
Well, we'll make that happen.
We will. We will. Thank you so very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Love your work, and thank you so much for what you do out there.
Thank you. I'm humbled. Thank you.